So, thanks for joining us today, guys. We're going to talk a little bit about Windows 365 custom images with PowerShell. There's additional takeaways from here, so you're going to get the PowerShell ability to create Azure Image Builder templates with PowerShell that can be used for anything in Azure. Windows 365 is a byproduct, and just going through the different things that we do with it in terms of converting it to managed disks and things like that. But before we get started, just like to say thank you to our sponsors. They make things like today possible. Patch My PC, the absolute people of swags. They've got so much stuff, it's unbelievable. And Chocolate here, because if you're going to choose a company name, why not choose chocolate? I'm David Brook. I'm a product manager at Power On Platforms. I'm a frequent blogger and vlogger at EUC365. I'm also a junior rugby coach, and I'm from up north, so it's proper rugby, it's league and not that kick and clap stuff. And I've got a passion for learning. If you follow me on Twitter or anything like that, you'll probably see I pass an exam probably once or twice a month. And then one of my favourite taglines is, knowing how it's done is great, but knowing how it works is even better.
So I'm a principal consultant at Power On Platforms as well. I'm also kind of do a bit of software development in kind of the spare time, what little I have. Also, I set up fireworks outside of my day job, and happen to have done that with PowerShell as well, and also the father of two wonderful rabbits, Ada and Pascal.
Cool.
So the tech that we're talking about today, kind of Windows 365, obviously from the title, but then kind of the core bit around the image, like the customizing of images. We're using the Azure Image Builder service to act as a automatic, infrastructureless-ish approach to doing that gold image creation and build. For those of you who don't know, Azure Image Builder is based on HashiCorp's Packer. It's a fully managed service, so we can kind of tell Azure this is the customization stuff, and they worry about all the Packer infrastructure builds, integration with Azure, all of that nice stuff. It just spins it up, spins it down as we need it. Cool.
So we're also going to breathe into a little bit of the Graph API. And obviously we're here to talk about PowerShell because that's what the entire day is about. But the Graph API is really for that interaction with Windows 365 and how we get the provisioning policies to either update or create based on what you've already got. Just a few use cases. So as Leo quite rightly said, it's more around creating that sort of old gold image. Windows 365 is generally will follow an autopilot process for people that do endpoint management. But what I found useful for Windows 365, and you can even use these same images for DevBox as well, is that long-running installs such as Visual Studio Code. You don't want to boot your machine up and wait 45 minutes for another piece of software to come down. If you pre-build these in, then it's going to save you a lot of time in terms of delivering that machine to somebody in a relatively short space of time. And again, just the long-running installs to go along with that development process, which is generally your development tools.
So, prereqs. At least for the initial setup, you need the ownership rights on the Azure subscription. The way Azure Image Builder works is it is building out a VM in Azure. And we need to create an identity for that, and we'll show that later on. So you need to have those rights to be able to configure permissions in Azure, at least at the initial stages. Once you get into the kind of the building, like the refreshing of the image, you need slightly less rights, but you definitely do need some ownership rights to start with. You need the Intune admin rights to allow us to configure the, or to kind of tie in with the Windows 365 section. And ultimately, what we're going to end up with at the end of today is we're going to have a completed image that is nicely customized with a few bits of software.
And then we're going to have the Windows 365 provisioning policy. Now you can either feed this in a name and it'll update one, so you can use this to continuously update images and provisioning policies. Or if you don't have one, you can create new ones off the back of whatever AIB images you do create. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by looking at what sort of the end goal is, so what you're going to end up with, and then we will go through the code retrospectively, just so you can see what the outcome is going to be at the end. But playing videos in PowerPoint is awful, so I'm just going to switch out of PowerPoint. So just very quickly, inside of Intune, you will this is the Windows 365 sort of portal. As you can see, very aptly named PSD UK 2023 demo. You can see here that we've got a custom image, which is called Windows 365 image, that's in our provisioning policy. And what that relates to inside the Intune console is, if we look at custom images, you can see I've got quite a few here. Not that I've spent a lot of time writing this at all. But we've got quite a few custom images here, and every time you iterate it, it will create a randomized name at the end of that image name. It is normally a lot slower than this, but for the purposes of the demo, we've done a lot of speeding up. And then, as you can see here, we've got a cloud PC that has been provisioned with that image, ready for us to use and log into, which we will quickly show now. And this definitely isn't that quick. This has had a lot of monster, a lot of run-throughs, and yeah, a lot of cutting down, shall we say.
But this isn't loading screen day, is it?
No, it's definitely not loading screen day. So yeah, it will go through connecting to doing the remote connection. Again, some nice lovely branding for some sessions that people might want to join later on today.
Did you apply that background through a script when you built the machine?
I didn't.
But you can do.
You definitely can do. I did do it through an Intune policy just to make it nice and easy. But what I did install is Visual Studio, which we will show inside the code in a minute. So we're just demonstrating that Visual Studio code does end up here with a certain set of tools that we specify. And then if we just move over to the other video, so that's what we end up with. And when we execute the script, so what happens is you execute it from the command line. So all these files are going to be available in GitHub for you to go and download, and they're free. You can do whatever you like with them. All of the comments are in there as well to be nice and helpful. But you would call, you'd just call the code with a subscription ID, the geolocation, so wherever your images are going to be stored, and a resource group name, and it will go create that resource group.
So it's probably worth pointing out that the first script, the create infrastructure script, that's kind of a one-time run. You only need to run that once per kind of environment generally, and that's just setting up some of the kind of core resources that we then use when we create the image definitions. But we'll take through all of that stuff in a second.
Cool. So again, this is very quickly sped up. It'll prompt you to log into Azure. It will go through, it will create all of the necessary infrastructure that underpins this. There we go. And very swift snapshot across. And then once we've created that infrastructure, we then go to creating the actual image itself, which is a separate script file. And to make it nice and easy, this hash table as well is available in the help section, just so you can copy and paste it and customize it nice and easy, and you don't have to retype it out because that would be a pain. But again, we just specify a few parameters that we put into there. They're all in the comments. There's a nice, lovely README file again, which will demonstrate, which will help you understand what these are for. And then once you execute this, again, PS readline is the winner of the day today. Yeah. So as you can see, it comes through again, prompts you to log in, and then it will go through. It's got some wait loops in there, just to show you that it's continuously going through the process. So even if you did put this into something like DevOps or GitHub pipelines, you will see this continuously going through and just see that the image is progressing.
Yeah?
How do you provide your creds in GitHub Actions if it's prompting you through a queuing secrets in and pass them?
So this script is very much meant to be run locally, but you can customize. So all of the modules that are used are the Microsoft modules, and you can go look at the documentation and push them in. So think using like Adam's session. I don't know if anybody went to Adam Cook's session before. You could pull this into a CID pipeline and change the connect to MG graph and stuff like that to using service principles and things like that, and connecting with secrets and stuff as well.
Yeah, and just to be clear, all we're doing is connect AZ account and connect to MS Graph. So however you get service principles or managed identities, it's all the standard connect to Microsoft stuff behind the scenes. You just need to switch out those lines if you want to run it automatically.
Yeah, go on, sorry. No, go on, sorry. I was just going to answer something for you.
My question is, how is it using a template image that's like Windows 11, 22H2 and building on top of that?
Yeah, so we'll kind of run through that stuff in a second. We'll kind of go almost line by line in a second once we've kind of showed off the whole kind of end-to-end. We just wanted to give people kind of the context of what the outcome is before we start kind of going to the nitty-gritty. But yes, we start with a Microsoft base image.
Cool. Any more questions? Cool. So as you can see there, once it's completed that section, it will then start uploading the image to Windows 365. Now, Windows 365 can't natively use an AIB template that you just go select from Azure that you can build a normal machine off of. You've got to convert it to a managed disk and then upload that managed disk to Windows 365, and then you can build machines. A real pain. Because its sister dev box, which is built on the same technology, can use native AIB templates, so go figure. We asked Microsoft and there's no plans to bring native AIB templates. But it will go through, and as you can see, again, it'll loop through just so you can see the progress of where we are, and then you will finish with the uploaded image. Cool. Well, yeah, do you want to go through the script?
Yep. So, yeah, we'll start with the infrastructure one.
Can everybody see this okay, yeah?
So first thing we're doing is we're pulling in all the required modules, making sure that they're installed and functioning. Then we get to the connect AZ account. Obviously this is going to prompt, but there are multiple ways you can customize that commandlet to do whatever it is you want to do.
Yeah, just to answer your question from earlier, if you just specified a dash identity on there in DevOps pipelines, it'd connect to Azure for you.
We make sure that the subscription is the correct one, because obviously Connect AZ account doesn't always go to where you want it to go to. And then what we have to do is we have to register a number of resource providers. So for those of you who aren't familiar with, or too familiar with Azure, everything is kind of modular from an Azure perspective. When you go into the portal, when you create a new VM, it will automatically kind of do a lot of the registration of that stuff for you. Because of some of the way that Microsoft is using Packer and things like that, if you haven't used a Key Vault before, for example, that's a critical part of the Packer, or the way that Packer kind of secures everything, and AIB secures everything. But if you've never used a Key Vault in that subscription before, it will actually fail the first time. So what we just do is we trigger the resource providers manually just to make sure that they're there when we expect them to be.
And Leo went rogue last night after he had a beer and committed another change.
Oh yeah, got blame on. Oops. But yes. So then we're creating a resource group, and then this is just to store some of the other objects that we create at the infrastructure level. What you'll actually find when you run the AIB instance, or the actual kind of creation of the image, it will actually create its own second custom resource group, which has a really long and ugly name. So just be aware of that if you've got things like required resource tagging policies, etc. I have certainly run into issues where that stuff can cause issues. So the next thing we're doing is we're creating a user identity. This is used by the AIB service it's kind of given to the image or the VM that is running, and that allows that the VM that is being customized to go and access internal resources to your environment. So what we'll show later is pulling a script from GitHub, which is nice and wonderful and public, but I'm pretty sure none of you guys want your super fancy customizations to be just publicly sat on the internet. Then we need to create a role definition to give to that user identity, and that's just used to kind of make AIB work, basically. And then what we're doing here is we're assigning that new policy
Role definition.
Role definition. I've been dealing policy too much yesterday. That we assign that role definition to that user identity, but because of latency and the way replication works and things, both the role definition and the user identity don't necessarily exist at the same time or immediately in Azure AD. So we just have to kind of do a bit of a loop through, make sure, and kind of wait for it to all kind of work itself out. So that's the infrastructure. In theory, you only need to run that kind of once per subscription. And then this is where we're then going to define the image template itself. This is in the kind of the config manager world. This is your kind of task sequence that we're going to create, and then we're going to run that task sequence. So we've got various parameters for various things, and as David said, there's a nice set of examples at the top there that you can kind of customize. But you'll see here we've got publisher, offer name, and offer SKU. So this is one of the base images that Microsoft provides as part of kind of their kind of default galleries that is designed for Windows 365 usage. So we're going to take that and we're just going to apply our own customizations over the top of that. In theory, you could bring your own image, like you created on-prem for whatever reason, or you could go use like the default Windows 11 image or the 2012 R2 image if you really want to. Those, I wouldn't recommend those because the Win365 images or the AVD images, they have a whole bunch of customizations from Microsoft in those already. If you want to make life hard for yourself, you can use whatever image you like.
It is important though for Windows 365 you do choose a CPC machine. They are optimized for the cloud PC service. In the README we will there's a link to another script where you can go get them image available options. Again, the additional takeaway of this is you can use this script to create any Azure image, create any VMs you want from there. So that'll be really useful at that point. So
first thing we do again is install all the modules. Then we connect to both the Microsoft Graph and we set it to use the beta API because for whatever reason they are very slow at bringing Graph APIs into kind of 1.0. And we're also connecting to Azure again, just in case you've run those scripts kind of separately. Again, we're setting the subscription. And then we're creating a new, what used to be called an image gallery, is now the compute gallery, which also happens to store kind of your baseline images. And that's where we're going to have the output for Azure Image Builder. We're then defining a template within that gallery, and that is effectively the destination point that the image will kind of get uploaded into. And then what we're doing is we're now starting the customization of the AIB image itself. So we're saying we're going to use the publisher, the offer, the SKU, and we're going to use the latest version of that. So in theory, you don't even need to use the latest version. If you're super, super conservative, you could say, okay, well, we're going to use last month's patches, etc. If you really wanted to. Wouldn't recommend it, but there's options there. And so we're taking those parameters and we're just going to create the kind of that AIB source object. And then this is where things get interesting. We're, sorry, not quite yet. So this is so we've defined the input. We're now defining the output, and we're just defining it as the gallery location that we just created. and we're turning that into an AIB kind of sub-object. And this is where things get interesting. So what we're doing at the start, we're using a PowerShell customizer. What it's doing is it's creating a folder, and then we are creating two folders, and it's just going to write a single file to the file system. So this can be quite useful either for creating temporary locations for storing like your downloads, or if you need specific files on there, and also for kind of tattooing that image with this image was created on XYZ date by XYZ person. Then we're doing Old Faithful Chrome. And as mentioned, we're pulling this actually off of David's GitHub directly, so anyone has access to this script, which is great for demo purposes. Wouldn't recommend it for production. In this location, you could set a URI as a SAS token if you've got any specific storage locations that are publicly accessible. Or you can put it to a storage account, and as long as you set the AIB image identity to have the blob read permissions or the file system permissions out of the system. Sorry, question.
The inline stuff.
Yep.
Would it be standard to have like your configuration script there, or can you call something like Terraform to do the provisioning once it's provisioning the machine once it's up, or Ansible?
So the question was, can we use things like Terraform to create, manage all that permission set with it, is it?
Yeah, the inline, so once your Windows machine is up, to get it into a usable.
So
Would you do that? Is it best practice to do it with inline?
So in theory, what you're doing is it's building an image, and it's going to run a script. What you put in that script, if you want to use something like Terraform, Ansible, any of those kinds of things, you could do. I've never had experience of doing that, but you are literally just open image, run PowerShell. So if that's then going to bootstrap your Ansible config, etc., the key thing you're going to need to watch out for is that once the script returns, it moves on to the next phase from an AIB perspective, which will generalize and shut it down. So you just got to make sure that you've waited for it to complete if you're going to do something like that. Yeah?
Assuming you're getting the disk images from Azure somewhere.
Yes, that was this bit here.
Can you only access it via these commandlets, or are those images somehow available for you to just test with if you wanted to boot up like a physical machine or something?
So these images are all as part of the Microsoft kind of baseline gallery. So when you're going into like new Azure VM, and you can kind of specify the images there, it's the exact same kind of back end.
Yeah, so you won't be able to build a physical, but you'll be able to go build on Azure VM with them exact same images. Yeah.
Or if you really wanted to, you could kind of spin up a VM, grab the image, and download it and put it on-prem if you really wanted to go down that approach, but then you get into some questionable licensing places.
Licensing, that's an whole other day. You can have a full day on licensing.
So if you just got kind of small scripts, or you don't want to go to the faff of kind of managing the whole storage account location, that kind of thing, you can absolutely just do inline scripts like we've got here for the Visual Studio install. And most installers tends to be 1 or 2 lines of like MSI exec, XYZ, etc. So yeah, there's just different ways of doing the same thing effectively.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend using scripts behind a blob storage. This is just literally for demonstration purposes to show you what you can do. Generally, if you're going to go download an MSI from somewhere, I would do it inside a script and keep your script up to date with Git or something like that, just to make it nice and easy.
So finally, what we're doing is we are checking to see whether the template already exists. And if it is, we have to delete it. Unfortunately, there's a limitation at this time with AIB where you can't update an existing template, so we have to just delete it and recreate it. And then we are getting the user identity, and we are kind of combining all of that together, all of those customizations, and we're saying this is now one giant template, please add it to Azure. And so at that point, effectively, we've created that task sequence, if you're going back to that kind of config manager approach. What we then need to do is actually say, okay, well, we want to use that, and we want to deploy that out to an image, to a VM. We want to create that gold image. So that's what we're doing here, is we're saying we want to start that deployment off. And then what we're just doing there is we just have a do-while loop that is going to sit there waiting for it to complete. And for a kind of a basic image that we're like this, we're talking kind of 35, 45 minutes. Obviously, it is 100% dependent on what installers you're doing. Visual Studio obviously can take anywhere up to an hour, depending on what you're installing. You can also customize the VM size of the Packer image. So by default, it's I think it's a D2 image by default. But if you've got something particularly chunky, you could bump it to well, D8 or something, just to kind of process through it faster.
Cool. So everything we spoke about up to now is the things you can just take away and use for creating whatever Azure images you want. The next bit is where we really start to convert things into that sort of managed disk, and then uploading that into Windows 365. So what it does is it goes and gets the latest image version, because you might have multiple image versions based on how many times you run this script. And then it will go down and create the disk config. I did check in some code yesterday as well to change this to Hyper-V Generation 2 to stop some warning messages, because there's a breaking change coming soon. And I just wanted to make sure it worked fine. And then here, so we saw in the provisioning policies before, the name of the image as Windows 365 disk. So that's specified here. We could probably parameterize it. That's probably an oversight on my part, but it is very customizable, and you can call it whatever you'd like to call it. So then, if there's again similar to the templates, if the disk exists, it won't let you recreate it. So we've got to again go check if it exists, delete it, and then we can start creating that new Azure disk that we then utilize to upload into Windows 365. So here is where we then go and create our upload object. So we've got the display name of the image output, the latest image version, and the image output ID. And what we will go and do is upload that to Windows 365 using the Graph API. You can do this via native JSON, but using the modules always tends to work better. And then again, it will go through and check if the image is ready or not before it continues. And then this is where we were speaking about before, where we say you can update a provisioning policy you already have, or you can create a new one. So it will go check if you've got a current provisioning policy with the name you specify. If you do, it will just update your current image, and if not, it will create a full-on template, which will then go and create you a provisioning policy. You will then assign a user to that group, and it will start building their machines with that custom image you've built. So there is a few gotchas, and consciously we might end up running over time, but feel free to ask questions at any time. So there's a few gotchas. Run elevated and run a system. If you run them separately, it might install, it might not. It's literally a look of the draw. I've had them where it does install, I've had them where it doesn't install. Generally, if you're going to run one, run the other.
And so what these are is it's just identifiers in the actual customization. It's like saying, am I going to run this as admin or not? Which is effectively what run elevated is, and then run system is run it as the system account, basically by PS exec, rather than running as the identity of the user that's created. Most installers prefer to run as run as system when you want to do it at that kind of system level, especially considering you've got to remember that we are running sysprep on these images as well, so that original user probably won't exist in the Win365 world. So, as always, your applications can be fussy buggers, and yeah, you just need a bit of trial and error sometimes. But yeah, generally, running elevated, running a system will give you a more consistent deployment.
Yeah. Another one is only alphanumeric characters are allowed in the Azure compute gallery name. You can't have hyphens or anything like that. It really screws up the process and throws lovely red arrows all over the place. And then, as we mentioned, just some additional takeaways. The foundations of these scripts you can take away, rip them apart, use them for creating any image on Azure. I brought that in at 5 o'clock this morning on a train. But what I would say is, if you've joined Barbara's session or Adam's session before this, you could certainly use the Git principles for checking that code in. And then you can use the CI/CD pipelines to build this into something that updates images very constantly for you. And with that, the code is available on the GitHub repository at the bottom. Just before we move into Q&A, I will just show you the effort I went to write in a nice little README to give everybody enough information. Not that one. That one. 2 lines is not a lot of information, but there's some tables in there as well to explain what the parameters are and what it's doing at what processes as well. Yeah, but guys, if you've got any questions, feel free to ask. Silence is golden. Either we've bored you to death, you're hungry, or we've done a good job.
I was just going to give you a shout out, guys. Great presentation.
Thank you.
I used Market for my presentation, which actually ran off of Markdown.
Okay.
So I'm just kind of throwing it out there that if you got rid of PowerPoint and did it all in Market, you wouldn't have to flick to the other screen to show your Markdown.
That's a very good shout. Today's been my first ever speaking session, so it's a good one for the future. So it's the first time I've spoken today, so you guys have broken my cherry. So congratulations to you all. But yeah, thank you very much. And I think Patch My PSA laying on some nice dinner now as well, so who love sponsors. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
I have got Markdown installed. There's an
there's
extension called Markdown.
Sorry, quick question.
Yeah.
This is of particular interest to me because there's a potential acquisition of another company on the other side of the world currently going on. We've actually to make a decision as to whether to provision stuff like this
Yep.
or physical desktops.
Yep.
Now, physical build works great. There is a cost involved. How much would you expect to pay for like 4 gigabyte PC, 1 CPU?
I definitely won't go 4 gigabyte. If you're going to go cloud PC, go 8 gigabyte minimum, because you get the CPU difference as well. So that's a recommendation to start with. But what I would say is, do they need to have dedicated machines, or can they use multi-session environments?
I mean, the main thing for us is that we can apply some security to it. So
Maybe Azure Virtual Desktop and a more of a multi-session would be more cost effective than this. I'd use this specifically for reasons where it needs to be a dedicated machine, like a developer or something like that. So you can mix
Or
this
maybe
with
execs.
or maybe execs, important people. But for someone like that just needs security and certain things, but don't necessarily need a dedicated machine, Azure Virtual Desktop with things like FS Logics and things like that is probably a better option.
Yeah. And they're all based on the same engine behind the scenes. It's all the whole RDSMI from a few years ago that they never actually brought to market. So AVD was the original implementation, and then Win365 and DevBox are actually just kind of layers on top of that. And then you've also got things like Nerdio and Citrix as well, which will layer on top of AVD natively. And again, depending on your usability, cost profiles, all of that stuff.
I plan to do some sessions on DevBox, but DevBox has its own inbuilt request system as well, so DevBox might be an idea for your developers as well. It's got its own inbuilt, go and select an option and build a DevBox on there.
Do you have like an estimate of how much it would cost to run this build process? Because I know that Azure cost is...
This build process is fairly cheap. This
because
pounds.
Yeah, the resources that sit there permanently are free. So the costs come from generating the images. So what it's doing is it's spinning up a couple of VMs. It's like a B1 for the actual Packer image. It's like a tenner a month kind of thing if you ran it the whole time. And then the actual image that you're customizing, which starts at a D2, but you can then change it to whatever you want. But even if that's £1,000 a month, which is not, by the way, it's even if you went for like a D8 that was £1,000 a month, you're only actually running it for that half an hour that it's doing the customization on. And then it's all getting cleaned up and destroyed. The only things that then are persistent is the storage account and the image gallery. And the image gallery has a cost per region per image. So what we do internally is we have a script that runs that backs onto the end of this, which says, okay, well, are there more than 3 versions of the image? Okay, we'll delete the oldest one, just to keep things pruned and cheaper.
I guess you manually turn off the D8 after you run the build.
You don't need to. So the great thing about AIB is that it creates the VM, it runs the config, it syspreps it, stores the disk, and then deletes everything.
Yeah. No problem.
But yeah, the image customization side, the costs on it from a infrastructure level are practically negligible when you start looking at the costs of AVD or Win365.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned having like a beefier build VM.
Yep.
Right? So there's probably a cost-benefit analysis where like your VM can be built in 10 minutes versus an hour.
You never get a build below 30 minutes. Just generally, you'll never get a build below 30 minutes.
What are you actually doing beyond the script and sysprep?
Essentially clicking next, finish, or doing an unattended XML behind the scenes to build that machine to start with.
But is it running like Windows Update or something? Like what's taking...
So you have to specify.
So you don't necessarily need to run. It's about half an hour to do the end-to-end process. So it's roughly 5 minutes to build the Packer VM, provision that initial source image. Then you're running whatever customizations you're doing. Then you've got to run sysprep, which typically takes a couple of minutes. Then once it's shut down, it has to copy that image into the Azure Image Gallery, and that can take, depending on the size of the image, 5 to 10 minutes. So you're talking at an absolute, if you had nothing in, and you're probably going to want to reboot in there, which takes a couple of minutes as well. So in terms of the end-to-end of you're doing no real customizations apart from sysprepping, you're talking about 20, 25 minutes end-to-end, plus then your application installs. But theoretically, you could do a cost-benefit analysis on D2 taking an hour versus a D8 taking 45 minutes. I would suspect that it will still end up costing you a bit more. And the reality is that the time it takes for you to do that analysis is probably 6 months worth of savings gone right there. Yeah. Because you really aren't spinning them up for more than a couple of hours at a time. And even the chunkiest VMs are like £1, £2 an hour.
And if you shove it into CI/CD pipelines, it's not your problem. It's just going to do it itself.
It really comes down to when you want to make it a shorter time frame, either because you're doing a lot of ad hoc image builds or you're doing that initial development piece where you're iterating rapidly to fix bugs, etc. and therefore your development time is valuable. But most of the time, once you get into kind of production, you'll generally be running these things, or at least when we're running them at 3 a.m. on a Sunday night. Like, provided it finishes within 6 hours, we don't actually care. Thank you very much, and enjoy lunch.
Thank you, guys.